cultural phenomenon. We have placed it in its historical context. And we've seen the ways in which it was portrayed in the media. We have looked at its adopters, specifically suburban teenage girls and female athletes and professionals. And we have looked at the ways it has been fetishized. Let's now try to develop a semiotics of the scrunchie. Semiotics, the study of signs, tells us that every cultural phenomenon can be studied as communication. The scrunchie can be read as a symbol. Thus, we have the signified and the signifier, and we have the scrunchie and the meaning or idea expressed by the scrunchie as distinct from its physical form. We have its time, the late 80s and early 90s. We have its country, the United States. We have its social class, middle class suburbia. The scrunchie has become distinctive of a particular time and place. However, the relationship between the word scrunchie and the object it refers to is arbitrary. Roland Barthes, who is probably the most famous semiotician of the 20th century, elaborated on this idea in The Fashion System. He showed that economic concepts such as production, distribution, and consumption could be applied to cultural phenomena as well. In fashion, this corresponds to the real garment, the represented garment, and the used garment. So, for example, we have the real scrunchie, the prototype, the scrunchie pre-representation, Rami's unnamed invention. This is then transformed into the represented scrunchie, the scrunchie through words and images, the scrunchie in mass media, marketing, and pop culture, the scrunchie as language. Finally, we have the used scrunchie, the scrunchie you are wearing right now in your hair or on your person. So now we must ask the big question, is the scrunchie fashion? What is fashion? And how does a garment acquire meaning? Now, in industrial society, fashion is subject to social opinion. As the sociologist Herbert Spencer noted over a century ago, that's him right there, nonconformities of dress imply inferior status. There is a spectrum from complete conformity, which would be a uniform, to complete individuality, a completely personal fashion. To make a political analogy, progressive fashion encourages more variety and creativity, whereas conservative traditional fashion adheres to social control. At either end of the spectrum, fashion disappears. If everyone is wearing the same thing, fashion does not exist. We have burqas, or nudism. However, on the other hand, if everyone is wearing something completely different, fashion does not exist either. There is chaos, a complete dissolution of fashion. Here we have Thorstein Veblen smoking a cigarette. He is the author of the classic Theory of the Leisure Class. He noted that dress is a systematic behavior that reveals latent class interests. The leisure class acquires status through competition and through public displays of consumption. For example, who wore what? Who wore it best? This is a common feature of fashion magazines in which people are often asked to vote. To be considered beautiful, an object must be rendered useless. Veblen's example was a lawn, a useless version of a pasture which had at one point the ability to feed livestock. A lawn communicates only the ability of its owner to maintain it. This is where we can begin to tease out the connection to hair. Long hair is a symbol of youth, beauty, and leisure. It is impractical. It requires a lot of maintenance. Back to fashion. What are the characteristics of fashion? There are a lot of conflicting tendencies. For example, pride and exhibitionism versus modesty, or the difference between belonging to a group and imitating what a group wears, to differentiation, the ability to elevate oneself above and beyond your peers. In other words, fashion is about mixed messages. It is neurotic. Here we have a number of binaries. On the left, we have the characteristics of fashion. On the right, we have the characteristics of what we could call, for lack of a better word, unfashion. We have the most important characteristic of fashion, which is flux, the constant change. On the other hand, stability is what makes unfashion unfashion. On the left, we have nonconformity, irrationality, display, status, leisure. On the right, conformity, rationality, modesty, and comfort. Fashion likes leisure. Unfashion likes manual labor. Fashion is expensive. Unfashion is inexpensive. Fashion is wasteful. Unfashion, useful. Fashion, unequal. Unfashion, equal. Although the scrunchie seems to fulfill a number of the requirements for unfashion, for example, it is inexpensive, perfect for manual labor, and it's very useful, it also seems to confound expectations. It often satisfies both. For example, it synthesizes the opposition between belonging and differentiation. Every scrunchie looks the same, but the fabric, the color, and the pattern are customizable. Perhaps this is the reason the scrunchie elicits such ambivalence. It doesn't fit comfortably into one category or the other. In fact, it depends heavily on the wearer and the wearer's reasons for wearing it. Is the scrunchie a reluctantly fashionable object? I guess the answer to that is it doesn't matter. Interestingly, all fashion eventually becomes unfashionable through the following process. We start with innovation. For example, Debbie Gibson wearing a scrunchie on music videos. Moving on to imitation. Young girls imitating Debbie Gibson by the scrunchie. Diffusion. Millions of girls wearing the scrunchie. And conformity. Everyone's wearing a scrunchie. But what are the reasons for unfashion? There are many. First, utilitarian outrage. For example, opposition, religious or otherwise, to waste, impracticality, or vanity, or health or fitness. We've seen that gymnasts and other athletes wear the scrunchie, joggers, no doubt. The concept of modest dress has been championed by Mennonites, Hutterites, Mormons, Quakers, the Amish, etc. Modest dress is an extreme statement. It turns its back on everything that fashion stands for. It treats bodies similarly to furniture. That is, not to be adorned, but to be protected, to be covered in fabric. Here we have a chair wearing a scrunchie. This is in direct contrast to the secular fashion elite who prize globalization, technology, and interactivity. Now, it is interesting to note the scrunchie's popularity with modest dress practitioners. The scrunchie is considered wholesome. It is easy to make at home, it can be handmade, and in the same way that Amish dress patterns don't vary much, but the fabric will change from season to season, there is a single scrunchie template that is customizable with different fabrics. The scrunchie is wholeheartedly embraced by these communities. Here is what I think is a beautiful image of 4 Hutterite girls looking down on a river. They are all wearing the exact same dress, but in different patterns. They are all wearing sneakers, and they're all wearing hair bonnets. Here is a homemade scrunchie as seen on Etsy. It has been knit. So, we know